Hey guys, you may have seen my little tease of a little photo montage, just a few seconds long. Well, the pickup has just been made and we're at the storage facility. We meaning myself and my buddy over here. So, backstory on these. I was contacted by one of my viewers on YouTube who I'd never met before. And he said a buddy of his, unfortunately, had passed away, and he said that his I believe it was his spouse, was just going to hire like 1-800-GOT-JUNK, and they were going to haul all this stuff away and have to pay a disposal fee, $50 a TV. But he knew that they were worth something, and he knew me, so he contacted me. And long story short, I got a bunch of TVs and some scopes and some parts and some antennas. Don't have room at my place to take it home right now, so we're going to unload this, and I will give you a peek at each set as we get them out. Okay, down here in the bowels of the storage space, let's start going through these. First, portable Philco. I actually have one very similar. I did a video on it. I tried powering it up even. And it was the cowboy edition. It's kind of brownish with like faux leather, and it's got a steer kind of stamped into it. Well, this is the salmon and off-white version, in much better condition. Mid-50s, I'd say. Similarly, I'm sure some of you guys have seen this before. I've seen plenty of people posting about them and working on them. This is an RCA portable. A little bit of paperwork here. It's one of these. I think those are, yeah, that's one of these guys. The knobs certainly look the same. Don't know the exact model number. I've heard these are kind of a pain to work on, and the picture tube's a little bit different than your usual picture tube. Like it has thinner glass, or it's made out of Pyrex or something to save weight. If that is the case, they didn't save much because it's still really, really heavy. Carrying on, again, mid-50s, like 56, 57-ish, I'd say. And moving on with portables. I have a very fine example of a Zenith bug eye. I worked on a whole bunch of these a few years back. I think I did 3 in a row. Well, here's yet another one. And remarkably, all the knobs are here. Because they're on top, putting controls on top is not really the best idea. Because these controls usually get corroded out from stuff getting in there and the knobs get broken off. But these are all here, as is the back. And the original paint job isn't too shabby. This is metal. I think it's aluminum. I don't know what kind of coating they put on it. But that could be, reading it could just be corrosion over the years. If it is just pure aluminum, I'm sure, certainly it could be polished up really bright. And it's got all the knobs. So this is a better look from the front side. I think you can see why they call it a bug eye. And in the middle, well, let me move this a little bit. Now we get to one of the older sets and one of the more unusual. This is a Firestone. Yes, Firestone did sell TVs and appliances. They didn't make them though. This is actually a Teletone. I think it's a model 196 or something like that. That Firestone has a brand name on. They had maybe 4 models of TVs and a few radios and washers and dryers and stuff like that. I think they might have sold them alongside the tires or something like that. Not exactly sure what the history is, but it is a 7-inch electrostatic TV with knobs. It's very much RCA looking. It's in rough shape though, but it is a pretty uncommon set. So I will do my best. The plywood is separating, the veneer is separating, the veneer is chipping off. In other words, the cabinet is falling apart. But it does have the back, which is hinged, And here we're going to look inside. And let's see, it's got some corrosion. It uses a ballast tube. I think the design is a bit different than other electrostatic sets I've worked on. I mean, it's got the same 7JP4 pitcher tube. It's got the same RF type high voltage generator, but otherwise, I briefly looked at the schematic, and the power supply is kind of trippy. So that will be interesting to work on for sure. Here we have the second pallet, which, let's see, on top we've got tubes. We've got some boxes of tubes that I just very briefly looked at. I know they're mostly TV tubes. So, yeah, for sure, series strung tubes. 5AQ5, 3GK5, 6SN7s, great to have. Got some horizontal output tubes, 6CD6. These look to be used. We got a Compactron. I think the rest are all new, old stock. Another one's a box of 12AU7s, always nice to have. Some more interesting stuff in here. We were puzzled about this tube, a 5557. It looks like an 807 inside the box. I'll take it out in a moment. Box of 26 AU6s. Great to have. I go through 6 AU6s like crazy. Some more horizontal output tubes, 6BQ5, 6DQ6. Not sure what's in here. It's an opto base. So that's 6L6. Nice power audio output tube. Bunch of 6N7s. Don't really have a use for those, but I got a whole bunch of them at home as well. Some more 12AU7s, some more series strung tubes, some rectifiers, 12SQ7s, SN7s. Good stuff. I can definitely make very good use of most, if not all, of those tubes. And then we get to some antennas. The 19BG6, definitely can use that. He has some cool antennas, and I collected some of these myself. These, oh boy, I cannot remember the name of the company that made these. Delta Beam, there we go. These arms fold out, and they have these cool coils on them. I think it was as much for show or gimmicky than anything else, but they do look kind of nifty. A few of those. And there was this power cable in there, and I think there's a decent chance this will actually fit onto that Philco RF generator I restored recently, where we ended up just cobbling something together from 2 spade terminals. Another Delta Beam, we got a Rembrandt, and this atomic age stuff. Kind of nifty. And here's an old school one from the early days, late 40s. Cast iron base, Bakelite ball, and then the curly Q, and then the 2 arms. VHF only. And this little nifty antenna. Again, VHF only. So I guess the idea was use the rabbit ears for the lower frequency channels and spiral for the higher frequency VHF channels. And looks like there's a bag of tubes. Oh no, bag of knobs. Oh yes, we need to check out the bag of knobs. Knobs. I'm sad to say, from so many hours of looking at knobs on eBay and stuff, I actually do know what most of these are. And we got lucky because, well, that one's got a chunk out of it, but that is a predictor knob, and that is a predictor knob, as is that, and these, and this, and this, and this. So always nice to get some predictor knobs. Especially these. That is the power volume contrast knob. And these are the channel clunker and fine tuning. Nice to have. And then these are Admiral knobs with that distinctive waffle pattern, and these would go inside of those. Motorola, it's got the squiggle, the early squiggle M logo. Again, definitely can make use of most, if not all, of these knobs. So, good deal all around, for sure. Alright, quickly moving on. I did not expect to get some scopes, but I got some scopes. Got an early Tektronix 675 and a Knight. I don't know anything about either one of them other than the Tektronix seems to be well made. All the knobs work. It looks to be in decent condition. The Knight, not as much. It's got rust on the bottom. It may have been sold as a kit back in the day. I don't know. It's very basic. All the knobs are the same. Seems like, except for the smaller ones, and the CRT mask is kind of just coming apart. But I know people do collect and are very interested in Knight stuff, so I took it. And the last TV down here right now is this guy, which is a Spartan. It's an unusual brand, both with TV and radio, that kind of did things their own way. Let's get this in a better light because it is in really nice shape. Unfortunately, that's just bubble wrap. Unfortunately, it's made in the era of when TVs were cubes, basically. It's first generation rectangular set from 1950. It's got a 16-inch CRT, I believe. But they still had low deflection angles, so very long necks. So you end up with a box that's a cube. It's the same in every dimension. Awkward to pick up and move around and to put anywhere because it sticks out so far. But they do tend to work well, and it's pretty. So there you go. And it's in really good shape. It's got all the controls, still has the labels. Basically, everything that this guy had in his collection was in really good shape. Oops, I'll have to figure out how that door goes back up. So like everything's got all the knobs, it has the backs. Generally the finishes are in fine condition. There's some minor scratches that'll be easy to take care of, so that's why I ended up with this as well. But that's not all. There's also a Zenith radio in here from, what, early 50s? One of the first to have tweeters in it, in its original box. And another scope, a newer one, a B&K that supposedly works. Some giant Fresnel magnifying screens. And I think the two best TVs of the crop. This is a Philco 48-1000. It's the first TV Philco ever sold, which is a crazy cool giant cabinet with just a 10-inch screen. Here's a look at the back side. It's fairly similar to the Philco 49-1040 I started working on a million years ago and never got back to. But this is slightly earlier, slightly more primitive. I've heard they're a pain to work on, especially the audio. It'll be interesting. It's so old it has electromagnets for the ion trap magnet. Old, crusty stuff. And this is a Motorola 9T1. You've seen me do plenty of electrostatic Motorola's. Here's yet another one, but this one is in remarkably good original pristine condition with the original back. And look at that inside. It's like it's barely seen any use. Yes, we do have asbestos up there. And look at that ballast tube. It's like not even, usually they're all rusty and heat damaged and stuff. And the copper chassis is like virtually corrosion free. And I'm not sure about those caps. They have gold cardboard covers. Usually they're black. Those might be replacements. The set might have been worked on. It might have been restored. I have no clue. I have not looked inside yet. But the other thing is the cabinet. You know, this is Bakelite. It's in fantastic condition. And here's a look at the front. I've had several of these over the years. First one I got had a big chunk missing out here. I got one that's got a crack running down the back or a chunk missing out of the bottom. This one is all there, and all the knobs are here, and the grill cloth is original. Don't know if the picture tube's good or not, but all that aside, it's in really, really, really nice condition. I found myself driving near the storage facility, and I thought I'd take the opportunity to look at these sets in a little more depth. I was in a hurry before. It was the 4th of July. My buddy was with me. We had to drop these sets off and get out of here. So let's start off with the Zenith. I had restored, I think, 3 or 4 of these for a friend a while back. So I am pretty familiar with them. It's been a few years, though. However, I remember them looking a little different. I think this one is newer. This one doesn't have a carrying handle on top, and I realized now that it has UHF. There's a UHF indicator on the channel clunker, and behind it is the UHF knob, which has a nice vernier action on it. So there's no handle on top, so how do you carry it? It's supposed to be a portable TV, right? Well, these sort of tubes on the side here have indentations where you can fit your hand. These sets are affectionately known as bug eyes. I think you can see why. It's because the way the knobs are placed. So that would be the channel knob, and this is power and volume. Bit of a design flaw, I think, putting the knobs on top, but they did make these for a few years, so I guess it was acceptable. A few problems. One, you can't really put anything on top of the set. Dirt and crud gets down to the controls. I had a lot of trouble with these sets in the past, needing to replace controls and having them been corroded and frozen, and knobs often broken, damaged, missing. These appear to be a match set, but this one is sticking up higher, which might indicate it's not an original knob or the control below has been replaced. Not sure, but yeah, generally you don't want controls facing up, not if you want them to stay clean and undamaged. Speaking of that, it's just a single color brown. Some of the other ones come two-tone, a little bit more attractive, but the original finish is in fine shape. This front is aluminum, I think. I suppose it might be zinc or magnesium or something. And it was coated with something, which is worn through in some places down to the bare metal. No idea what to do about that. All these sets have the backs, which is great, but it also means that right now I can't easily take a look inside them because I don't have any tools with me. But from what I can see, let's see, can I with a flashlight? I'm using my phone rather than my usual video camera. But yes, it does have a flashlight feature. It looks pretty clean. I remember these being quite easy to work on. It's funny, right up top there we can see that this has a diode in it. There it is, that red thing. That is probably the video detector. These used an interesting construction technique. It's kind of sort of point-to-point wiring, but they used sort of cups filled with solder, and they would just shove the component leads into them rather than wrapping them around terminal strips. Interesting. There's an AGC control up there. Probably no year on it, but it's a Model Y 1816RU. So that is a Zenith bug eye. Next up, a classic RCA portable. I've seen lots of guys online have these, but I've never owned one or seen one up close before. Very, very clean design. Thinking the front comes off. I notice there's one recessed screw here. It's probably one on the other side because it is kind of dirty inside there. This is just a VHF model. Volume, contrast, and channel clunker. tuning. Again, the back is here, so it's a little hard to see. Let's try to peer through the grill. It's pretty clean inside from what I can see. Generally speaking, these portable sets are a bit of a pain to work on, and there are some design compromises typically, like they don't have quite as wide a video bandwidth. So, funny thing though is they are often more collectible, more valuable, more desirable because, well, you know, not everybody has a room or can transport a big old console set like this Motorola behind it. And that leaves the Philco. Now, this may look familiar to some of you longtime viewers because years ago, 6 years maybe, I got another one of these. It's brown, and I think it was called like the cowboy model. It has a leather handle. Not the most attractive, I think, but I'm sure back in the 50s when cowboys, TV shows, westerns were so popular, that was a big selling point. I think this is a much more attractive color combination and should clean up quite nicely. Again, like on all of these, the original finish is great. I do not have to repaint anything. That's great. This also solves a bit of a mystery, as this is made maybe 2 years before the Predictas came out. Now and then I come across knobs that look like Predicta knobs, but the shaft lengths are different. That's probably because they came from something like this, in a different color. And the other one I've got, I was looking at some photos of it, has the UHF option. And there's a knob right here, which looks an awful lot like the UHF knob you would see in a Debutante or Princess Predicta. So these type knobs are used on more than just the Predicta sets. The original antennas are in excellent condition, as is the handle. I mean, just overall, aside from some dirt, this is in remarkably good condition. And I guess these are not that common, according to another collector. I know I really haven't seen too many of them. And let's see, can we peer inside? Not as easy to see into this one. But from what I can see, it looks okay. So I'd gotten a comment about doing a Shango style assessment on all these sets. Well, again, I'm out here in the storage facility. I only brought 2 of the sets home, so it's a little bit awkward to do. But even if I did bring all these home, they're all in really good shape. I don't want to start taking them all apart or taking the backs off of all of them and checking out the picture tubes and stuff like that. I don't want to risk damaging them, even just scratching the finish or anything like that. I'll get to them all in good time, and I'll do them one by one. And for sets like this where I've got 2 of them, I'll either do both at the same time, or because I know the other one's in much worse condition. It's got rust inside and so on. If I need any parts for this one, that one may become a donor set. We shall see. All of these sets are about from the same time period, which would be 1957-ish. Sure, between like 56 and 59. Screen size. I think those are both 17s, and that would be a 14, I believe. And it says Philco Transitone on the front there. Hey, what do you know? I did some poking around and I found the other Philco Transitone, the brown version. It's actually a little bit better condition than I remember it being. I know it does have rust inside, though, and a little bit of wear and tear here and there. This has a leather strap on top. And I also remember now that one of the issues with it is that it looks like there was something placed on top of it, and it was exposed to the sun for a long time, so we've got this unfortunate two-tone kind of effect going on here. It's probably closer to the original color than this other area here. Maybe if this was waxed a bit, that could be kind of less noticeable. Or not waxed, I mean polished. Like maybe this this lighter colored layer, maybe it's really thin and with a slightly abrasive cleaning product. It could be evened out. I'm not sure. Otherwise, yeah, repaint the whole thing, which I'd prefer to avoid doing. And it's got these nice brass trim pieces on it. But it's not as nice as the other one, so that is always the troubling reality, whether it's radio or TVs, test equipment, whatever. What do you do with it all? What do you restore? What don't? What becomes part sets? What sits on the back burner indefinitely? You know, I mean, obviously the newer version of this I got, it's a little bit more attractive and it's in better condition. But I also know that I did power this up and I got a picture on it, so it is definitely restorable and it's got a good picture tube. And if the other one does too, you know, I'd be inclined to restore both. But, you know, time will tell. Time will tell. But anyways, I thought you might like to get a look and see what another version of the same set looks like. And now the Spartan, which is from that unfortunate era in television when cabinets, well, were big cubes basically. First generation rectangular picture tube. They had really long necks because they had a really low deflection angle. I think 75 degrees, maybe 90 degrees. So they had to have these large cabinets because the neck comes all the way to the end. So if you wanted a big screen, you ended up with a big box, basically. It wasn't until they got the shorter necks that they could start doing crazy things like the Predictas. Anyway, that being said, it's actually a pretty nifty set. So Spartan's another unusual brand, and I didn't realize it when I first saw the photo of this set that it's got a continuous tuner on it. So let's take a closer look at that. It's actually a variable capacitor in there, or several ganged variable capacitors. And I separated out the low frequency VHF 2 through 6 and the higher frequency 7 through 13. And I think there's a switch internally, so see it's got a bit of a drive reduction in it. And I think we're going to hear a switch clunk. Or maybe it switches over silently inside. Or maybe this thing is a little gummed up. Maybe you can only turn it this way. I'm not sure. But it looked like there was inside there's a switch that cuts out a portion of the inductors when you go from the low to the high. These are channels I believe are like over 200 megahertz, whereas these are in the like 50 to 80 megahertz range. Love to get the front of this off so I can get this piece of crud out of here. Looks like a piece of tape or something that's behind the safety cover. And this would be on off volume, which I'm guessing is a little askew because, so right now in the off position, you think that the lettering would be up top so you could see it a little bit better. This also seems to have kind of, it's not a one-to-one action between the inner and outer portion. It's a little bit of play in there. Weird. The finish on this is in fantastic condition. It's one of the reasons I really like it too. Not only like an attractive color scheme of the mahogany and the gold, and it's all in really good shape, but this is in great condition too. These scratches are quite shallow. I can reflow the lacquer and touch this up, but like the rest of the lacquer, I mean, geez, that's a really, really nice finish. There's like no alligatoring or crazing or anything. It's hard to believe that this is 70 years old. I mean, even the edges, like there's like no veneer loss or no chips on the edges, nothing separating. That's really remarkable. And this front, I think this is a solid piece of wood, which is also quite unusual. I think this whole front frame, it's like a solid mahogany or some type of wood tone to look like mahogany. It's got some pretty nice grain to it. Often they'd use faux finish to make it to make cheap like poplar or something look like mahogany. But no, it's a great color match, and that's a pretty substantial, solid piece of wood. So there's a speaker, although I don't see it. Oh, it's on the other side. They used matching panels, even though there's only a speaker on one side. Now, I did take the back off of this because it was damaged. And there were only a couple screws holding it, and they weren't secured very tightly. So, unfortunately, this cracked off. It looks like one corner's missing, and this had some damage there. So perhaps, if I really want to get crazy with this set, is I could glue that back together and make up the missing piece out of some masonite and patch it back together. And even the back, I mean, yeah, this is masonite, but this feels heavier than your typical masonite. Maybe it's a little bit thicker or something. Not sure, but it's heavy. So what do we got here? It's got a built-in antenna, a fragment of a tube chart, and there is the model. 250 watts. Spartan radio, Sparks Withington Corporation, Jackson, Michigan, USA. Let's take a little look-see inside. Nice label down there with the chassis type, 26SS160. Well, we're taking a look at the schematic for this in a bit. And aside from some dust, wow, man, this is clean. This is super clean. I mean, there's like zero corrosion in here. All the plating seems to be in excellent condition. They really rust on the transformer. Wow. It's a little bit of cadmium sulfide here and there, that yellow stuff. And yep, this is the first gen rectangular picture tubes that have really, really flat sides, really thick glass, and long necks on them. It is a GE 16KP4, excellent. I think that's the aluminized version, if memory serves. There's an RP4, which is not aluminized, but I could be wrong. It might be the KP4A that's aluminized. Time will tell. There's a speaker. Gold clips on it. So it's funny, it's maybe the least stylish of all the sets, but engineering-wise, I think this is the most interesting. There's that capacitive, variable capacitor tuner down in there. It's going to be a pretty good performer, too. I did peek at the service info already. Because it's a little bit newer. It has tubes that are like 6CB6s and stuff. Some newer tubes on the scene, better than 6AU6s and 6AG5s you see in earlier sets. And it has a really nice power supply design. It's actually got dual secondaries, 5U4 and a 5Y3 for the high and low B+. So it's a really well engineered set, too. I'm thinking that's maybe a big filter choke. No, probably vertical output transformer. Either way, it's kind of an odd to see it on top of the chassis like that. I've never worked on a Spartan TV, so I'm also interested, curious to do this. I think this is one of those companies that wasn't keen on paying any royalties to RCA. Same with Philco. And if you look on the back, they mentioned they licensed some stuff from Hazeltine, but nothing about, I don't know, I guess they had a license of stuff from RCA. Probably you had no choice, because RCA kind of patented everything TV-wise. But for sure some of it deviates from this typical design of its time. Neat stuff. All right. But for now, it's going to have to go back into storage because I got to finish a bunch of other stuff first. Well, the eagle has landed, so to speak. got the set safely home into the basement, and actually by myself I just managed to put it on top of a GE 802, which I think is kind of apropos, seeing as how they are sort of related. And by that I mean, well, so some of you didn't seem to know what this was, or you said it looked interesting, but that's or ugly and interesting. This is a Philco 48-1000. It's Philco's first TV. They had some pre-war designs, but they ceased all production during World War II. And right after, this was their first tabletop model. And it is a kind of crazy design, somewhat pre-war looking, kind of primitive, gigantic cabinet. So it's only a 10-inch screen, but it's got all this extra stuff. So you see other 10-inch sets like the GE locomotive that, well, it would be like this size, just lop off this whole extra bit over here. But no, this is a big chassis running the whole width of it. And we got the speaker behind here. And this may somewhat look familiar, because it's similar to the Philco 49901 Secretary foot-powered radio, in quotes. It's not foot-powered, it's hand-operated, but anyways, it had a very similar grill to it. They are rare, and they are sought after by collectors. I've never really had a chance to get one, not without taking a long trip or paying a good chunk of change, or both. This one appears to have had very little done to it, which is a plus. No, it's not perfect. Some of the veneers coming loose. We were very careful when moving it, but this definitely needs to have some gluing and clamping and some touch-up. I'd prefer not to refinish it, but it looks like somebody started to strip it here, because this is down to bare veneer with no grain filler left or anything. This whole spot here. If I did a really good job touching it up, maybe, and then up here as well. You know, perfect color match and match finish and everything, maybe. It's a pretty big cabinet, and we got a few things going on. We got a darker tone down here, and I wouldn't call it quite black. Might be a very dark walnut, and then kind of medium brown walnut, and then the gold trim here. Here it is from the back. I do have the back cover to the set. I do have the cover for the high voltage box. Unfortunately, part of the original label's gone, but here is part of the tube layout. So you can see those Lochtel tubes, the 7W7, 7B6, 7F8. Part of that might be legacy from pre-war designs. Pre-war, in the late 30s, a tube came out called the 1232, and that was used in a lot of pre-war designs because it was a higher frequency pentode, I think, and they typically used it in the IF stages. So they may have kind of stuck with that design and used a little bit more updated tube. I'm not sure. I'm also not sure why the high voltage box is quite this big, because it's definitely got some extra room in here. But there's your horizontal output tube, damper tube, kind of a primitive looking flyback. Let's see if we can get some more light to go in here. And high voltage rectifier and a doorknob cap. So nothing unusual about that. It's just everything's bigger and more primitive looking and spread out more. Big old power transformer, dual 5U4 rectifier tubes. And there's a huge transformer behind it. I gotta look at the service info. I think that might be a huge filter choke, which is cool because it probably means there aren't a ton of electrolytics like the RCA 630 TS, which is RCA's first mainstream commercial TV, has a ton of electrolytics. I can see 3 of them right behind the transformer. So as I mentioned earlier, I think I do have a Philco 491040. It's a year newer than this. It's somewhat similar to this, so I have some familiarity with it. Let's see if I can get my camera in here and you can take a look. The IF, I've heard these things are a pain to work on, pain to align. The audio is especially finicky. Look at these IF cans. Some of them have as many as 3 trimmers inside. I think the way they did the wide bandwidth IF on this is a very cumbersome way to do it. Philco was not exactly friends with RCA and kind of did things their own way. So this may be a little bit over-engineered and over-complicated. I'm not sure. But anyways, it's all here. So we have a speaker, there's some power supply components, and now the tuner is way off to the right. I don't know if I can quite get, if you guys can see it down there, the drum tuner. And the picture tube is mounted to the cabinet. It stays in the cabinet when you work on it, which is cool. The yoke plugs in down here. So that should make it a bit easier to work on. I'll just use a little test CRT. Electromagnetic coils for the ion trap. Magnet assembly. And it even says on this, on the back panel, like, don't monkey with any of that stuff. If you've got services, leave all that stuff in the cabinet. That's why I think the glass is going to be tough to work on, because I think I have to take the picture tube out. Unless there's some secret way to get the glass off from the front, I'm going to have to pull all this apart, which I really, really, really don't want to do. But sometimes there's a trick, because out in the world when people use these, they wouldn't occasionally need to clean off the face of the CRT because dust would get in there. This does have some typical Philco design elements, like it's got the rubber cushions on the chassis corners, just like the radios do. There's the AC interlock. I don't know what that is. Again, I got to look at the service info. Maybe an input for a phono or something. Oh wow, checking out these controls. That's horizontal and vertical center. It's got a beam bender control. Wow. That is what is another name for the ion trap magnet. That must control the current through the electromagnet on the ion trap magnet. In other words, you can control the magnetic strength of the ion trap magnet. Wow. I've never seen that before. Huh. That is pretty trippy. If that's a serial number, it's a huge serial number, but there's the model. So, that's that. When I moved it, I could feel there was some kind of like plywood separation or something down below. So I do also want to take a look at that. So that will definitely be interesting to tinker with. So yeah, I'm very glad to have one of these. I've been looking for one for a long time. It's a very nice addition to the collection. Here's the other set I brought home, the Motorola 9T1, which is in excellent condition. Big Bakelite cabinet. These so often get scratched and cracked, and chunks are missing, and they get sun faded. This one is in remarkably good condition, best one I've ever seen. The only flaw I see is right here, and I bet it's because of this. It has a hinged back, and there are a couple of things sticking out now. Could very well be for wrapping the cord around. It doesn't quite look robust enough because it's a pretty long power cord. It's like 8 or 10 feet long. Maybe for an antenna that you could wrap around there. But the back is hinged, and when you flip it up, that kind of makes contact. So we're going to kind of bend that down. Although, you know, this has an internal antenna, I just remembered. So, yeah, now I'm really puzzled what that's all about. So the other puzzling thing is that it's in kind of too good a condition, which makes me think that this may have been worked on. Even the rubber feet. And the real red flag to me is those capacitors. All the originals I've ever seen were black and said Motorola on them. These say CDE, Cornell Dublier Electronic, CDE. And the ballast is in remarkably good condition, and it's almost dust-free. I just can't imagine this has been sitting around somewhere for 70 odd years, and this is clean. I'm saying it's impossible. Could have been in a box or something. It's just unusual. Even the screws are kind of shiny, so I'm gonna These are pretty easy to slide out. It's just 4 screws, and we can see what's really going on. And yes, that is asbestos up there, so we will hold our breath. Huh, something else that isn't quite right. That has a Phillips head screw, the others did not, and this one was missing. This just kind of floats, it's just for the foot, and the chassis comes down at an angle and should be secured there. Well, I got them all out now, so we can finally see. I'll slide the chassis out and we'll see if it's been worked on or not. Well, here it is, and yes, it has been serviced, but quite some time ago. And actually some of the replacement capacitors, like this one in particular, are Admiral branded, but probably from the 50s. They look pretty questionable too. You know, it almost looks like those are restuffed capacitors, but they're much newer capacitors, because those end seals look really weird. Huh. It's definitely a newer electrolytic. But an awful lot of the original parts are there. And then we get to this. This is fun. So somebody had to replace 2 of the high voltage caps. Looks like the horizontal? No, I think those are the vertical. And they did a crazy combination. Looks like they paralleled a whole bunch up. Okay, so yeah, they paralleled 5 .001s to get a .005 ready for 6,000 volts. However, Z5U dielectric, which definitely varies a lot with the applied voltage, so this must have a very distorted vertical sweep and some pretty crusty, rusty looking controls too. But otherwise, it's in really nice shape. So yes, it was serviced. Likely, well, it's hard to say. I mean, just going by that blue cap and that orange drop and those guys, maybe in the 80s. And I don't know what's up with those 2 white ceramic looking caps. Huh, interesting. I know you're all anxious to see me dive into that Philco, but I gotta finish off a bunch of projects and really clear the decks and do some homework before I'm going to dive into something like that. So what I'd like to leave off with in this video is we're going to look at the schematics for what I think are 2 of the more interesting sets in that collection. So the Motorola we're just looking at, I've done a whole bunch of those Motorolas. But what we've never seen, what I've never talked about is a Philco that early or the Spartan. First, let's look at the Philco. What I've got here is Writer's Technical Television Manual Volume 1. This is in the crusty early days. Half the or not half, but some of the stuff in here is even pre-war TVs. I have not really looked through this too thoroughly, but I was surprised right away to see that this is really, really out of order. Might even be some bits missing. For example, we go from Westinghouse to Belmont. This should be alphabetical. Luckily, I already skimmed through this, and it does appear we do have the 48,000, or sorry, the 48-1000. The first 2, the early published copies of Volume 1 and 2 of this are in 8.5 by 11 format with fold-out pages. The later publications of Volume 1 and 2 and all the later volumes are a larger form factor. So, you gotta do a lot of unfolding to get at everything. And I was a little surprised that this set isn't quite as bizarre as it looks. Oh boy. Normally what you would do is this binder comes apart and you would extract the service info while you're working on the set and then put it back in, which I'm sure is why it's so out of order. That being said, if it was taken apart and used much, they really maintained it well because the pages are not stained or written on or anything. And then we got this huge large format to look at. So one thing I identified right away is that plug on the back that looked like it had 2 wires cut off, and I was wondering what it was for. That's the antenna jack. It does not have the traditional 300 ohm screw terminals on it. It actually has a plug, and they are 300 ohms, but they're not screw terminals, and 2 pairs, or 1 pair rather, is for the higher frequency stations, and 1 pair is for the lower frequency stations. Idea being that you would have an optimal antenna for the different frequencies, because there's a pretty big jump from channels to, well, back then it'd be channels 1 through 6, and then there's a gap, and then 7 to 12 are quite a bit higher in frequency. That's why you see on some of the early rabbit ears, like I was showing earlier, they have the 2 retractable long rabbit ears, and there's like a little curly Q or a spiral or something. That's for the higher frequency stations. So back when this set came out, they probably weren't sure how people were going to hook these up in their homes. So let's just give them 2 separate sets of terminals. All right, anyways, after that, it's actually fairly conventional. 6J6, we see that all the time with a mixer oscillator tube, and a 6AG5 RF amp. And for the mixer, very, very common to see these 2 tubes in tuners. So that's not too different. And then right away they split it off. We have totally separate paths for audio and video. And part of the reasons most really early sets have really lousy volume or audio is because the audio carrier power used to be a lot higher. As one of you sent me a detailed comment recently, reminded me that, yeah, a number of times over the years they dropped the relative broadcast power of the video carrier versus the audio carrier substantially. From when, I think when TV's broadcast first started, the audio was like 30% of the video power, and then later became like 10% or even less. So you really got to get this thing aligned right and tweak this as much as you can. Or if you're lucky and you've got a Blonder tongue or another commercial type modulator, they have separate controls for the power of the audio and video carriers, and you can artificially bump up the audio. Anyways, then we get into the IF, and here those cans I was showing that had all those slug adjustments. Here's what they look like in schematic form. So part of it is trap, because they want to trap that audio carrier from bleeding through into the video. So on these first 2 stages, they've got a trap to reject that audio, and then several slugs for the video coupling. A little more complicated than I've seen in most sets, but okay. On the 6AL5, a detector, an AVC, nothing too weird there. Separate AVC amplifier. That is a bit different. I guess they don't get enough out of this to drive the AVC bus, so they further amplify with an entire separate tube. And I've never seen a 6AG5 used for a video amp. 6AU6 Shure, or a 6V6, or some such. Also never seen a 7C5 used for a video out. That's one of those Lochtel tubes that they like to use. And here's that brightness control. Now when I first looked at this, I thought, there's no DC restoration. Most really early sets were over-engineered. They wanted to make sure they worked really well, and DC restoration is something they typically had. This does, it's just not obvious where. It's this diode. So as early as the set is, it did actually have a semiconductor in it. On 1N34 diode. This is used to reintroduce the DC voltage, because what did they do? They capacitively couple the video signal to the video output tube. You lose your reference DC level. And they kind of recreate it here and add it back in. There's that background control. Now another odd thing on this, I was surprised to see, it's not on this schematic, but online I found actually a scanned copy of the original Philco service info. I'm not sure where Riders. Typically, Riders info is they reproduce the original manufacturer's info. They get their permission to redo it. But this looks different from what I saw online, so I'm not sure where this came from. But what they don't show on here that I can see is the high voltage. But on the original Philco service info, they said the high voltage was 7,000 volts. That's kind of low. More typically, these would run at about 9,000. So I don't know why they did that. And basically, your picture is going to be less bright. Seems kind of like an odd thing for a flagship set to skimp on that a little bit. But alright, well, they did. Power supply is a bit convoluted, as I thought it might be. So here's a pair of 5V4 rectifiers in parallel. In that big transformer looking thing, I'm pretty sure that is this filter choke. And there is a negative voltage rail on this too. The center tap does not go to ground, so we've got positive and negative voltages in this. Part of the reason they do that is so they can have centering controls, horizontal and vertical centering. That adds DC bias to the yoke. Nice feature, but most sets got by later on, which is kind of a gimbal on the yoke, so you could tweak it, or some magnets to shift the image a little bit. So that is the IF video stuff. Sound, there's a couple 7W7s for the IF, 6AL5 discriminator. They use 2 electrolytics on the ratio detector or discriminator. I'm not used to seeing that. Usually there's just one. 7B4. A lot of these Loctile tubes I've never used before or seen before. 7B5 audio output tube. And there's our output speaker. Alright, down to the sync stuff, which is also a bit weird and using Loctile tubes. But when you get into the horizontal output, it's pretty conventional, and vertical output. 6SL7 dual triode for and a blocking oscillator, I believe. 6K6 output, the vertical output transformer for the vertical yoke, and then 7F8 sync amp, 6SL7 horizontal sweep or horizontal oscillator, 6BG6, very commonly used in these early sets for the horizontal output tube, and then there's our flyback. And this is a little bit odd, a 6AS7 damper tube. A number of early sets use that. It's actually a triode. Yes, they use a triode for the damper tube, which normally would just be a diode or a rectifier tube. Let's switch over to the computer. Here is the Philco service info. It's funny, I do have a copy I showed a while ago of their pre-war kind of preview of what TV is going to be. And it has the same 2 women sitting in this chair, but it's a different TV here. It looks like they did kind of an early version of Photoshop to update their manual. Now this does have detailed stuff about how to set up your antenna and so on. And unfortunately, I don't think you can get that glass out of the front. I talk about when they ship is to ship picture tube separately, and a professional should mount it inside the cabinet, and then you leave it alone. So, not too crazy about that. Here's a closer look at that tuner with the plug-in coils, and they explain what all the controls do, and then they go through block by block how everything works. And they have really detailed parts locators, very much like their radio service bulletins, and troubleshooting guides and all kinds of fun stuff, and alignment info, and production run changes, I guess. Whew. A whole lot of them. Wow. Let's go back to the schematic for a moment, because I saw something on this version that I did not see in the Riders, which was, let's see, I split it up over several pages. Sorry for jumping around. Where the heck is the power transformer? punch down in here. Check that out. We got our 6.3 volts for all the tube filaments. We got our 5U4s, but up top, 6.5 volts, and then X. That goes to the damper tube, I think. Yeah, the two Y terminals. Yeah, back over here. Or no, sorry. 6.3 for the Y, for the damper, but all the other tubes 6.5. I wonder if that's because when you have all the tubes hooked up, they draw so much current, there's a bit of a droop. Or is that just a typo and that should be 6.3? I don't know. You'd think they wouldn't want to run all the tubes hot, which would shorten their life a little bit. Anyways, let's look at the other set that I thought was kind of interesting, which was the Spartan. Spartan's another company who kind of did things their own way. And they're bad scan, but that is the Spartan. First generation rectangular set with a 16 KP4 or 16 RP4. 1 year later they all went to 17 inch. It was just in 1 year or so they'd use 16 inch picture tubes. And they were slightly different than later ones, but we'll talk about that another day. What I really want to talk about is the design of it. This has continuous tuning and a few other slightly odd things. So when I went through that Philco, I said, you know, you break it down, it's not that odd. This one's a bit odd, for sure. So, it's a few years newer. This is about 1950. 6 CB6 RF amp. This is a superior tube to 6AG5, bit more gain. And a 12 AT7 oscillator and mixer. And then look at this ganged thing here. They use a variable capacitor, continuous tuning, with a high-low switch to go from the lower VHF to the upper VHF channels. That is weird. That is different for sure. And this has intercarrier sound. So rather than split off the sound right here and have separate IF, video and audio go through here. Then they pick off the sound at 4.5 megahertz and then go up through here. So a bit more modern design. Let's see, does this have DC restoration? No, I don't think so. 6AH6 video amp. 6AU, 6AGC. So this is all a bit more modern, using tubes like a 6BA6. Certainly no lockable tubes. Power supply is a bit complicated on this too. They have dual secondaries, a low and a high, B+, a 140 volt bus and a 330 volt bus. Phase detector for the horizontal lock. Dual triode oscillator, 6B. And this was also a little bit unusual. They use two 6BQ6s in parallel to drive this flyback, because they pump out 14,000 volts into this picture tube, so it should be nice and bright. And they've got a horizontal centering control, but there's no vertical centering control, which I thought was also a bit odd. So I kind of wonder, inside the set, how do you vertically center it, or don't you? Can you only tweak the horizontal centering down here? I've never worked on a Spartan TV. I've ever worked on a Spartan radio. They were out of Michigan, and they, like I said, they did things kind of their own way. So that will be an interesting one to work on. All right, so that is going to be it for now. I hope you enjoyed this little preview look at some very, very generously donated TVs. Here's one of those Fresnel lens screen magnifiers we got, which I guess straps onto a TV that would have like a 25 or 27 inch screen. Well, of course we couldn't resist on such an intensely bright sunny day. Can we start a fire? And oh yes we can. I'm certainly singeing it. I'm going blind.